Good afternoon, everybody, once again. My name is Omolabake Olagunjo. I am a Senior Program Associate with the Creative Economy Practice at CC Hub, and I'm based at the Lagos office. Welcome all to the Fashionomics Africa Accelerator online program. Today, we'll be covering high-quality product manufacturing in fashion. Kindly note that translations are available in English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. We request that you look for the round interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen to select your preferred language. Today's session will run for 1 hour, 30 minutes, with a training session followed by a question and answer session. In today's session, we will be covering pattern quality, garment accessory quality, and garment quality. Please turn your camera on if you can, and share in the chat what you are looking to get out of the session. Before we start, here are some ground rules. Switch on camera if you can. Use the chat box to ask questions. Raise hand if you want to say something. What we discuss here stays here. Mute your microphone unless you want to speak. Participate actively. Give space to others to participate. Please ensure that your Zoom name matches your registration name. This is for the purpose of taking attendance. Attendance will be taken anytime during the session. So again, we'll ask you to ensure that your name matches your registration name so that you are not marked absent. Let me briefly introduce our facilitator for today. Anne McCreed is the founder of Kiko Romeo. She is a fashion consultant, trainer, and connector. She is an award-winning fashion designer with over 2 decades of experience in sustainable fashion and development in Africa, as well as earlier years in Europe. She's an expert who is widely recognized as a pioneer in the East African fashion industry, a multilingual connector, inspirational leader, teacher, healer, and creative thinker. She's passionate about using fashion to create good jobs and build understanding between communities and across social classes. She enjoys sharing knowledge of design, business, and brand building with the next generation of leaders in Africa. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Anne McCreed, our facilitator to today's session. Hi, Anne McCreed. Good afternoon.
Hi, thank you so much, Omolabake, for the introduction. It's indeed an honor to be here. I'm seeing some names I know from before. Hortense, you're on my screen right now, and I'm sure I'm going to see a few more. So I should also say bon dia, I should say salam alaikum and bonjour. It really is lovely to be able to do this session, which is covering the whole continent. It's quite fantastic. Now, today, I'm going to talk to you about high quality garment manufacturing. I know some of you are not making clothes, but I hope there'll be an overlap with your fields, because at the end of the day, everything we do, I feel, we have to make to the best quality possible. Now, when I say the best quality possible, I set up our brand Kiko Romeo in 1996. My daughter's now the one who's the creative director, the head designer, and I'm doing a lot of teaching. I can say that some of the challenges that were there when I started are unfortunately still around today. So we have to adapt to the environment we're in, and we have to do the best we can do within that environment. I'm seeing Ronki from Gambia. Nice to see you online as well. If anybody else wants to give a wave, please do. I have been all over the continent and taught all over the continent. So it's really nice to see these familiar faces. Now, today there's a lot of you on this incubator online. I always love to do interactive sessions with breakouts, but with so many people, that isn't possible. But what we are going to do to make sure that it's a little bit more vibrant, I'll be doing a mix of me on screen talking to you, presentation with the slideshow, and then I would like to do the questions in sections. I don't want to do all the questions at the end. So as I'm talking, if your questions, you think of something, please put it in the chat box and we'll deal with it after a certain amount of time. I want to pick up on something I heard in a previous presentation from one of the other speakers. Every speaker you have on this course may have a slightly different viewpoint on things related to the fashion industry. And that's very normal because the fashion industry is very big. It covers many different professions. We're in different countries. We're selling into different markets, and our personal experiences are different. So as I give my impression, please put it into that perspective. It will be up to you to look at your own environment and to work out what is true for you and what you feel doesn't work where you are. So I had experience in the European fashion industry. I trained in Italy, worked in Italy, and then I also worked for a little bit in Spain. So that was my background, and then I set up the company in Kenya. So I'm speaking to you now from the iHub in Kenya, and I'll try and give you my insight on how I feel you can achieve high quality manufacturing within the limitations of the environment that I've been in, and I know some of you are in. So let me just start by something I picked, which was quality versus quantity, which came up in a previous lecture. And I want to say that for me, you still have to look for high quality, even when you're producing in high quantity. What I mean by that is a factory can produce high quantity. It can also do high quality within the product it's making. So when we look at a brand, I'm going to take one of the global ones that everyone knows. If we look at a global brand like Zara, Zara's workmanship will be pretty standard, whether they're making in Morocco, China, South America. They will have a kind of standard that the consumer expects. So their price may not be as high as Gucci, but within their price, they will have a certain standard quality that everybody knows is there and can look forward to. It's the expectation of the customer. Something that changes the price of a finished item. First of all, we'll go through in the slideshow, we'll go through in detail, but the fiber that the textile is made from. Let me let you think about that for a minute. If I make something in polyester, polyester maybe costs $2, $3 a meter. If I make something in linen, maybe it costs $15 a meter. If I make something in silk, maybe it's $30 a meter. So the fiber of the fabric has a very big difference in terms of price. And that is reflected on the price that the consumer pays. Let me think through this with you for a minute. Polyester is a byproduct of the oil industry, and it's all done by machine. It's highly industrialized, mechanized, and they can make it in big volumes cheaply. If we look at cotton, cotton is farmed. It has to be manually picked, and then it goes through a series of processes which cost money. The same applies with linen. The same applies with silk. So depending on the process that is required to extract the fiber of the textile, the price will be very different. Then let me look at the process of the garment construction. So if I'm in an haute couture workshop in Africa or in Paris, there's definitely going to be a lot of hand sewing, handcrafting, hand sewing, fitting, trying, personalizing. The amount of labor involved in crafting is going to be high, and all of that must be paid for. If I go for a factory production for a garment like a Zara one, it's all about the number of processes involved in making the item. So I don't know how many of you may have bought a jacket or a trouser, and it looks very beautiful, but when you want to put your hands in the pockets, there are no pockets. It looks like there's a pocket, but actually there's no pocket. Can you give me a reaction? The reaction bottom is bottom right. Anyone had that experience? You're looking for the pocket and it's just not there. It looks like it is. I see very few hands going up, but I think some of you have that experience. So why is that? It's because in fashion, we try and make things look fantastic, look super. But if we want to cut the costs to keep the price down for the consumer, maybe we eliminate one or two of the processes. So by eliminating the pocket, it's faster to make. It also takes slightly less fabric, which in most of our businesses wouldn't apply. But in the case of mass manufacturing, when you're doing thousands of garments, every little bit counts. So the fast fashion companies, the mass market companies, they look at how to save while conserving the visible impression of the fashion item. But if you look at an item by Zara or any other of those types of companies, you'll still see that the stitching is very precise. I don't know how many of you have a battle with your tailor. Sometimes they'll be stitching like this that you wonder if they're on a zigzag machine, whereas actually they have to stitch straight. If it's a double stitch, they have to be exactly parallel to each other. Now, it doesn't matter if you're doing a high quality silk garment or you're doing a lower price point polyester garment, the stitching is very visible. And here we're in the business, I repeat, of high visibility, making someone feel good, look good. They want to look proud. They want to look great on their Instagram image. So they don't want everything looking a bit like this or a bit bumpy. They want it smooth, they want it sharp. That's how people work. True? Give me a reaction. So while you're finding your reaction buttons, I'm now going to share my screen and we'll start going through a bit of the presentation. Let me just do that right now. I'm just gonna put it on the slide share. Yeah, here we go. So this is us for today, and we're going to have a look at the high quality garment manufacturing. And as I'm talking about this, if you're a photographer, if you're an illustrator, if you're anybody else in the fashion industry, this thing of high quality applies in your trade. Consistency and making things look beautiful. So that's what it's all about. So today I'm going to look first at, I've divided it into different sections. What is a high quality garment? What about pattern quality? A pattern is the thing we use to cut a garment. A pattern, that's in the case of the garment manufacturing industry. It could also be used in a bag or in a piece of jewelry. It's something that allows you to replicate in exactly the same way again and again. We'll go on to the textile quality. I explained a little bit the difference between polyester and silk. Garment accessories, those are things like buttons, zips, and so on. Then garment construction, that's how you put a garment together, how you stitch it, how you make it. And lastly, ironing. I'm not going to touch on 3D garment construction. I'm going to stay on the traditional method of using a sewing machine because most of us designers are working with that. So that is why I'm going to focus on that. Thank you. This you already covered. That's about me. Those are your rules. And then this. So a high quality garment. These are the items I feel are important. And if you can think of any others, please put them in the chat box. We have the cut of the garment. Before it's stitched, how is the garment cut? What's the general style? How does it fit? How does it flow? All of that is the cut. We have the fabric, the consistency in the weave. Is it an even fabric? Is it deliberately uneven? How is it? And when I put weave, I'm also thinking of knits. I'm thinking of maybe how well done the printing is and also the dye quality. We have the accessories, the quality of the buttons, the zips and the threads. You can make a beautiful garment, but if your zip breaks, all the customer can think of is how they were in this party and all of a sudden their zip broke. Not a good thing. We have the construction. I touched on it, the stitching by machine or hand, the clipping, the fusing, the finishing. I'll get onto those in detail. If you don't understand a word, it's okay, we'll go over it. And lastly, how you present your work to the consumer. How is it ironed? How is it folded? How is it hung? How is it labeled? So, consistency. Now, I would love to say that everything in my business is consistent. It should be, but very honestly speaking, it's amazing how often I find something that's not as it's meant to be. And yet the customer who comes to you, they want to know what they're getting. They've bought something, they want the same quality again. They've seen it in a photo, they want it to look like that. They don't want surprises. They're buying because they feel they're going to get the quality that your brand is associated with. So if you're making changes, you need to consult with your customer. For tailoring businesses, they're looking at consistency in the quality of how you're cutting, how you're stitching, and how you're delivering. Hands up if you have ever promised to deliver by a specific day and you haven't managed to deliver. I'm not seeing as many hands as I thought I would. I know I've done that as well. It is a case of we sometimes overpromise. The environment we're working in can sometimes be unstable, irregular, all of those kinds of words. And in an effort to please the customer, we promise by the day they want it by, or even sooner. And then we go to the fabric shop, the fabric's not there. We get the fabric, we can't find the matching zip. And so it goes on. So ideally, we would know which day we think we can deliver by, and we would give ourselves a few extra days so we don't disappoint. This is the kind of thing that both designer businesses and tailoring businesses get judged on. And if we do it as we say we're going to do it or before, then definitely they're going to recommend us to someone else. Now, this thing of consistency in a wholesale and retail business. A wholesale might be you're making uniforms for someone. Or it might be that you're a very lucky fashion designer and you found a shop that's buying 10 or 20 pieces. They're not waiting to sell them before they pay you. They've decided that they're going to buy and commit. A retail business, you maybe have your own shop. And so you have customers coming to you for that. So if we're talking about consistency, it means when you're producing, for example, 5 pieces of the same style, in the same color and so on, they should be exactly the same. Now, I don't know about you, but in my workshop, sometimes I may have a casual worker that comes in and the head tailor has forgotten to tell that person that we use a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And in Kenya, maybe they use a 1/2 inch, and a 1/2 inch is actually slightly bigger than a centimeter. So by the time you've sewn the side seams and the center back, the garment is naturally slightly smaller than it should be. That is not being consistent, because it means this tailor stitched it, this tailor stitched it, and they're different. So whatever you can do in your business to streamline this, these are the kind of levels of attention that you as the designer or business owner need to apply. And as I told you, I also have these problems to deal with. I wish I could tell you I didn't. It's not something you can forget about ever. I've been in this business for what, 26 years, and still there are some things that we have to check. Even if we put methods in place, I don't know, someone wakes up in a different mood in the morning and they forget everything and come to work and do everything differently. So I understand the struggle, but if I'm talking to you about something high quality, these are the things we have to think about. I don't know if we have any questions yet. Mlabaki, is there anything that I can answer right now?
Not exactly. You can just continue with the session.
You're sure? Because yes. I would rather answer as we go along.
Please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to drop them in the chat box. I'll pick them and I will alert Anne so that she can answer them.
Okay, fine. I see someone saying that they have the impression of sometimes working with psychopaths. Yes, it can feel like that. So all I can do is tell you to have the courage to keep going, to put the systems in place, and to continually maybe train, retrain, do whatever you can so that you keep the right quality. Okay, I'm just checking. Okay, what does it, when you talk about a seam, what I'm talking about is the edge of the pattern. When you do a pattern or when you cut freehand, there's always an allowance for where you join the pieces of fabric together. Where you join the pieces of fabric together, that's called a seam. So if one person joins a seam with 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter, and someone else joins it with 5/8 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch, or 1.5 centimeter, 1.5 centimeter, in one case, you've used 2 centimeters. In the other case, you've used 3. If you use 3, that makes the garment smaller. And then when you put it on the shelf and you take out the size 12, for example, you'll find one size 12 is smaller than the other, dependent on the person that actually sewed it. So as far as possible, you must train, repeat, repeat, and repeat what exactly the seam allowance is, and it should be written on your patterns. An easy way to do it on the pattern is for you to make a stamp, and then you stamp it on the different seams. Let's go over the pattern quality. And after that, I'm going to take off my slides and we're going to discuss. I'm going to check your chats, the questions. So if you use a pattern, it allows you to replicate the piece exactly. Let me show you again. You see these cardboard pieces, these are a pattern, and you have a pattern for every size. And that means that when you put it on the cloth, each time you use this, you're cutting exactly the same. Another thing to notice is if you're using cardboard, you're probably marking it with chalk. And how thick is the chalk? And is the person cutting on the inside of the chalk or the outside of the chalk? Are their scissors sharp? If the scissors are not sharp, then even though they're using a pattern, it will be slightly bigger because the scissors have moved or the cloth has moved. Are they cutting 2 layers of fabric at the same time and one is moving slightly as they cut? When you cut with a cutting machine, a rotary blade, it's more precise. But usually if we're cutting one piece, we're using scissors. If you can use the blade, it's better, it's more accurate. So we're giving you the tools to develop things which help you have a consistent quality of product, a consistent size of product. However, there are all these little things that add up to make it work or not work. So a pattern will allow you to replicate it exactly. It can be graded mathematically to fit different sizes. So what we mean by graded is that once you have a paper pattern, there's a mathematical calculation to make the next size, the next size, the next size. It's usually currently done manually in Africa, in my experience. A few people have a mechanized way, and hopefully with more tech, we'll have centers that designers can go to and do this. And the other point of making a pattern is, although it takes time, if the fit is good, afterwards you can quickly change it for another style. You maybe change the neckline, but the actual fit of the garment is the same. So the important elements of a good pattern. Number 1, it reflects the designer's intention of the design. Now, what do I mean by that? If I give a drawing to one of my tailors or a photo, and I say, cut this, they're going to cut it in their way. If any of you are pattern cutters, it makes a big difference to cut a pattern, because then it's your interpretation of the design. It's not your tailor's interpretation of the design. If it is your tailor's interpretation, make sure you do the first one in a cheap fabric so you can test it and alter it. So a good pattern is going to reflect the designer's intention. It's going to fit the body as the designer wants it to. So in some cases, we have baggy fashion. The designer wants it to be baggy. In some cases, the designer wants it to fit the body. So a pattern allows you to achieve that in a standardized way. All the pieces fit together exactly. Now, when you make the first sample, ask your tailor, did the pattern pieces fit together exactly? Usually for a jacket, we'll leave a little bit of extra on the arm, on the sleeve, to fit in because of mobility. It's a tailoring technique. But in the case of shirt manufacturing, there's none of that. It fits exactly. Why I say you must ask is because you're human, and so is a pattern cutter if you have a pattern cutter. And maybe a mistake has been made. So you want the tailor to tell you what the mistake is, so you correct the pattern before you make 10 of them, or 100, or 1,000. I hope you're in the business of thousands. But let's spend the time to have an accurate pattern. The facings. Now, a facing, I can show you in my dress, but I'm sharing my screen. There's a thing that goes inside, which finishes the neckline or the armhole nicely. That is called a facing. They should fit exactly.
Hi everyone, I guess our facilitator is having a network glitch. Please give her some more time so we'll get that resolved. But pending the time that's resolved, please do well to drop your questions in the chat box and they will be adequately responded to. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you can see her, so please just signal in the chat box and she will know that you can catch up with her.
Right, so now I'm going to look at the chat box and answer the questions so far. Next time, if there is a next time that the net drops, please, you take a 5-minute break, stand up, move around, because it's always good with long sessions not to stay sitting the whole time. There's a lot of messages. Thank you. I'm glad you're happy I'm back. That's good news. Right, let me look for some of your questions. Anyone know of what the mathematical tools for grading are called? What I can do is answer that in the group. There's basically the whole art is called grading. Grading means mathematical proportions for changing the size of a pattern. So yeah, that's what that one's about. I've got so many, we miss yous, welcome back. I really appreciate it, thank you. How can a pattern help when sewing for an African whose size is bigger than a European size? This is a very good question. And I would say it's not just about being bigger, it's about having a completely different body structure. And when I say a completely different body structure, of course, there's some commonalities in African bodies, like the shape of the butt, but it's not the same everywhere. And I can tell you that even within Kenya, there are different types of bodies within one country, and we know the continent is massive, and the body types are also very different. You have some people with slim hips and a big butt. You have some people with wide hips and a big butt, and so on. You have some people with big thighs. You have some people with slim thighs. So what I did in our own pattern cutting, I spent time developing a pattern that fit a specific African body type very well. I think I spent 2 weeks total just developing a really great pattern for men's trousers. And having developed that, I could now do variations. So just make sure that you invest the time and energy in getting a good cut for a skirt, for a trouser. And if I can just say, a key thing on a skirt, you'll notice often that the back sticks out. If it's a straight skirt, maybe the back of the skirt is too short and it sticks out. The reason is there's not enough fabric to accommodate the butt. So you have to, if you're doing a center back seam, you have to make the center back seam longer while maintaining the size of the side seam. This is not a pattern cutting class. It's very difficult for me to do that in this session, but I would encourage you, talk to tailors who know how to cut well, and from there, develop patterns with them that fit well, that you can use again and again. Now, someone is talking about developing the average of your client's measurements to get a size chart. That's a really good idea. We, as designers in different countries, should try to develop a size chart, even with our colleagues. I don't like to think of other fashion designers as my competitors. I think we have different styles, different creativity. Customers buy from different brands. They don't buy from everybody, like one person, everything. We can work together to bring a data, we can pull our data, and we can then develop appropriate patterns. What I've generally noticed when I do a wide demographic of people in Kenya, say for making uniforms, if I talk about a US chart or a British chart or European chart, generally, if it's a 10 waist, it will be a 14 hip. That is in the case of Kenya. Look at your country, talk to others. You can even put it now in the chat box. That's my interpretation, but you're in different places, it may be different. Yeah. Invest this time in pattern cutting. It's what's kept me in business. I see somebody commenting it's what kept them in business. Now, the things that change in garment sizes, say 8, 10, 12, particularly the ratio of the waist to the hips, and sometimes the thighs, and then the center back length. Those are the things that really change. Another thing that changes is the crutch on a pair of trousers. That's if you measure from the natural waist at the front, through the legs, back to the natural waist at the back, it will be bigger than somebody who has a flat butt. That's without exception. Also, if you take the center front and the center back of the trouser, imagine you're cutting the body vertically in half. This is the butt, this is the front. The distance between them is bigger, like as the butt gets bigger, so does the distance between them. So when you're cutting, you'll find that you need a bigger difference between the center front and the inside leg on the front, and the center back and the inside leg on the back. I'll try and do a drawing for your group so you understand a little bit better. In terms of how many patterns to make, I make patterns for everything because I want to be able to repeat them. But if I was in a tailoring business, I would probably make standard patterns for the basics, for the bodice, for the trousers, for the skirt, for the sleeves, maybe for a dress. And then I would adapt it according to the client. If you have a client who buys a lot from you, it's really worth making a pattern for them. If they add weight, they'll add weight on the bust, the waist, the hips, but the vertical proportions will be the same. So that is why I would do that. Now, sorry, I'm just seeing. And if you're doing freehand cutting, I recommend putting an extra piece of fabric, cheap, so you can cut through the actual fabric and another fabric, which can then be the pattern. If you're say sending clothes to a shop in France that isn't an African fashion shop for Africans specifically, you might want to change the sizing to fit that market. But usually you would discuss that with the person who's buying the clothes. I mean the shop owner. Right, I'm trying to see if there's anything else. I definitely will be missing, I'll be missing some questions, but we'll follow up later. Now, is there a difference between centimeter and inches? It's what you're used to. I learned in centimeters, the maths are much simpler, and so I prefer them. But honestly speaking, if you can think in inches, great. That is, I think, oh, by the way, another thing I noticed differently, at least in East Africa, is that a lot of East Africans have much longer legs compared to the torso than, say, a Northern European like me. Right, and I think that's what I'll answer for now, and I'll go back to sharing my screen. Excuse me if I haven't answered your question. We'll try and do more as we go along. So I'm going now on to the textile quality. I will go through it a little bit quickly because I had explained some of these things. You have to know the fiber of your textile. I explained to you the difference of polyester and, say, linen. But the very important thing is you have to label your garment correctly. Now, if you're selling in the local market, people might not pay attention. But if you're exporting into a developed market, or if you yourself now are in the developed market, you'll know the importance. I've had baby wear removed from a shop in the UK because my labeling wasn't specific enough. Developed markets have strong consumer associations, and they have laws that cover it, and you're not allowed to sell something without accurate information on the label. Another thing I must tell you about is the word silk. Silk comes from a silkworm. It's a natural fiber. The worm has to work very hard to make the silk, and then so does the spinner and the weaver. But because silk is something that people want, it's felt beautiful on the skin, it's luxurious, a lot of textile marketers will call their fabric silk when it's polyester. Now, I think there's even a notification on the Africrea Anta site saying not to label it wrongly. Test your fabric. Cut a tiny bit, burn it. If it goes into black balls, it is polyester. Don't call it silk. If you call it China silk or whatever silk, that's the name of the fabric, but it's not the fiber. And it should not be what's on the label. It will get you into trouble. With consumers, they'll return things. Just know that silk is very expensive and polyester is very cheap. So the chances are, if it says silk and it's cheap, it's actually polyester. Right, knitted fabrics. Let's just talk about t-shirts, bodycon dresses. They stretch. Some of you know how to knit by hand. You use one thread to knit, and that is the same for a manufactured knitted fabric. It should be consistent. It shouldn't have holes. It shouldn't have bumps. unless the design of the yarn has bumps. You use different materials, different methods for assembling it. Weaves, you can see here the black and the white. So now the weft is the thing that goes across. The warp is straight and it just stays there all the time. It doesn't move. So that is the difference between the weft and the warp. And a woven fabric, a weave or a woven fabric, I'll put that name, or maybe on Omlabaki you can write woven in the chat box. This is the construction, that's what it looks like. Let's go on to the next. Stripes are often made using a woven fabric. If you can see a stripe on the front of the fabric and the back, the stripe has been created by the actual yarn that has been used to make the cloth. Usually, it's one of them. It's either the warp or the weft. If it is checked in little boxes, that one is the warp and the weft. If it has a stripe, but you can't see it on the other side, that is a print. It's a print that's made to look like a weave, but it isn't actually a weave. I'm not reading all of this. Down at the bottom, you'll see if you hold the fabric up to the light, you can see, is it lots of threads or is it few threads? The higher the number of threads, we call that a high thread count. And that is something that's highly valued. It means that the yarn is finer, higher quality, and the weaving is more. Right, let's go on to the next. So now the thing about dyes. I'm sure some of you have made something in a beautiful fabric and then you've washed it even in cold water and the color comes out. Technically, we call it a crocking level. We do have a problem that a lot of the dyes we're receiving in the African market are not high quality. And I always test fabrics before I make them into clothing because it is a waste of time. If a customer has given you their fabric, you need to discuss this with them. Because once I had a fabric from a client, I washed it and the color ran and she wasn't very happy. So discuss it first. Some natural dyes lose color. We know about them like indigo, and it's a prized thing of that cloth that the dye comes out. But you advise the client to wash it separately, and that's written on the label. But you must know what you're dealing with. Red is a color that is very difficult and often loses color. Blue, purple are usually okay. It depends. And if you're talking about the quality of the dyeing, it would also be, is the fabric even? Is the color evenly distributed? Or is it strong here and weak here? So when you buy a fabric, check the fabric before you pay for it. Don't just say, I want 10 meters, and then the first meter looks good and you didn't check. Again, we get a lot of fabrics that are left over, and sometimes they're left over because they have a problem. And if you're going to invest the time, energy, labor in making something, make sure you've checked these things before you use them. Prints. So I think some of you know, if you're making a high quality, and we go back to the word high quality garment, you want the print to match. If you've got buttons down the front, you want each side to look the same. If you're doing something on the side and there's a strong design, you want them again to match. Now, sometimes the fabrics we're getting, the fabric has slipped when they've been printing. So instead of the fabric remaining completely flat and even, it's done this. Sorry, I should do like, instead of it being like that, it's done like this. It's moved slightly and they've continued printing. And what that means is when we fold the fabric, the print is not matching on the side or on the edge. And that creates a huge problem for us as designers. It takes a lot of time and therefore money to cut the pattern to match. So take time to make sure you get a well-printed fabric. I think I'm just, yeah, and then the other thing about the colors, just check with the industrial printing, normally they should be okay, but sometimes things have been moved around a bit and that creates a problem. I'm going to go through this quickly also, and then we'll take some more questions. So if you're having questions, write them in the group. So garment accessories, I'm going to whiz through some. Buttons. I encourage you to look at making handcrafted buttons when you can for a higher quality garment, because it tells a story. Whether the button is crafted from wood, metal, coconut, or even I've been lucky to get laser printed buttons from Ethiopia, from Addis, they're laser cut horn, cow horn from the meat industry. Look at what you can make buttons from that are not these cheap plastic ones. However, sometimes cheap plastic ones are what you need, particularly when you're doing things for uniforms. Make sure you know what they're from, and for example, if you're putting dry clean only on a special textile, is the button or the crystal or the bead going to respond well to the dry cleaning fluid, or are you going to have them melting? You need to check these things. And you have to make sure you sew them on with the correct color thread. You can't have threads that are all different colors unless it's part of the design. And the technique for sewing them on should be consistent. Remember always to include at least one spare button on the inside of the garment, which can be used by the customer if something falls off. Now, zips. Zips is my #1 headache. It really is a struggle. YKK are the guaranteed go-to zip, but in many of our markets, they're very expensive. They are producing them in Africa. I think it's Swaziland or something like that. But anyway, they are being produced, but they may or may not be available in your market. And often what we might import from Dubai or China or so on, the quality is not great. We might think it's good, but then we try them and they split. I prefer to use a traditional type of zip, even if you can see it more clearly on the outside, knowing that it's not going to break, than an invisible zip, which is invisible but breaks. So be very careful with your invisible zips. There's nothing worse for a client to be at a party and have their garment break. It really is a problem. Discuss this with the other designers in your country and see what you can do, maybe to import high quality zips together in the basic colors and then distribute them. But there's no shortcut here. I've tried shortcuts. It's a very costly mistake, and it can even mean that clients don't come back again. So it's just not worth it. And even these YKK are not that expensive if you buy them internationally. So just invest in it. It's really important. Ribbons. So the ribbons are the things you maybe put on the garment to attach it on a hanger. The quality, again, of the ribbon that's being imported is often satin, and it destroys very quickly. It's really not high quality. If you can get a ribbon that's not satin, it would be better. And then make sure they're the same length, because if you have a long one on one side and a short one on the other side, that everything's hanging at an angle. It doesn't look good in a shop. Take the time. These are the details that are important. Now, thread. I hadn't realized thread was such a problem until I was talking about tension with my tailors, and they told me that the thread was a problem. So I don't know what to say about this. It really is exhausting. It's because a lot of the importers are looking at just a price rather than the quality. And so when I looked at some of the thread we had in our workshop, I found some bits are thin, some bits are fat, then it's thin, then it's fat. Now, that means that the tailor cannot get the tension correct on the machine. It really is a problem. It can also mean the thread breaks. And I don't know, sometimes some of the threads even lose color. So I strongly recommend you, again, investing in a higher quality thread. You know, 10,000 meters does last a long time, and it does make a difference to how long your garment's going to last. Remember, if you go to a shop and you try to break it and it breaks, then the chances are the thread is old or it's poor quality. So just, you know, insist on testing the thread. If you take it back to your workshop and it breaks easily like that, return it to the supplier. Even if the supplier refuses to take it back, if there's enough of you designers in one market, definitely they're going to spend a little bit of time getting the right one next time. And importantly, reinforce the stitching in areas that will get more stress. So if you're wearing pants, definitely when you sit down, there's stress on the thighs and there's stress on the butt. So when you're stitching, you need to reinforce those parts of the garment. When I say reinforce, I mean go backwards and forwards, or you stitch it 2 or 3 times so it's strong enough. Metal. Again, test the metal. Put it in water, put it in detergents, try it with dry cleaning fluid. Some of the metals we get are poor quality. And if that's the case, forget the metal, change the design if you can't get the proper metal, and just change it, because it doesn't work. If you do a beautiful garment and then it starts getting corroded, it just devalues the product immediately. So I'm going to have a look again at the chat box and see what's there. Omlabaki, have you got some already?
Yes, there are a couple of questions here. I will just point your attention to them quickly. Somebody says that okay, I think I almost missed that, but somebody was asking a question: how do I test a dye on a fabric to know if the fabric is good or not?
Sorry, just let me do one at a time. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. It would make it a bit easier.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead again.
Okay, the person was asking how she can test a dye on a fabric to know if the fabric is good or not.
Okay, I honestly, when I buy a fabric, give it to someone in the workshop, we test it in cold water, warm water, hot water. We just cut a little piece. If it's about knowing the fiber, we burn it. Now, generally speaking, with a lot of experience, you may know, but it's always worth burning to check. I'll share a link on it to an Instagram chart, which tells you how things burn according to the fiber.
Okay, somebody has another question. How can I use freehand cutting and still effectively achieve consistency?
Okay, so it depends what you are. If you're a tailor doing made to measure for the client, your consistency is about how well you cut the first time, second time, and so on, how quick it is to get the fit correct, how you deliver, and how you stitch. If you're doing freehand cutting for production, for retail, then you would have to cut a number of the same size at the same time. Or I did recommend that you can get a cheap fabric and cut it at the same time and keep that fabric as the pattern. Yes, next question.
Okay, what is the best hook and eye for trouser, especially for whites, because many of them rust over time?
I can't answer directly because I don't know, the suppliers may vary from one market to another. Hook and eye, I don't even know what they're called. You know, we just use some that I think are stainless steel, but I might be wrong. Yeah, I think, and for men's trousers also, they're slightly different. It's a bit like trial and error. You try one and it doesn't work well, or it damages quickly, so you now improve. But generally speaking, quality goes with price. Not always, and in handcrafting, not always, but with things like hooks, usually the more expensive ones from the same supplier will be the higher quality one.
Okay, there's another question here. How can one test quality of fabric or textile when shopping in wholesale stores? They may not allow one to do the aforementioned testing techniques.
Yeah, I mean, you can sometimes get a tiny piece. So you get the tiny piece from the shop and then you go home and burn it, or you go outside and burn it. And depending on how it reacts, you buy it or not. Next.
What is the average lifespan of thread from manufacture date?
I don't know. I'm so sorry, but I know in the market we're in Kenya, that the Coates brand, C-O-A-T-E-S, let me see if I can put that in the chat box quickly. That in our market, that is a higher quality thread, but I don't know in everybody's market.
Okay, where can we import high quality zippers? Country suggestion. Do you have any?
Where can we import what?
High quality zippers. Okay,
you Google YKK. Sorry, I'm calling it the old name, Swaziland, is it Etswani now? But I think it's made there, but depending on where you are in Africa, it may be cheaper to import it from a different location.
Okay, somebody is asking a question. Why do tissues obtained locally fade quickly? Is it a problem of dyes or method?
So again, it depends on the country. You're from 54 countries. I noticed someone talking about Cote d'Ivoire. I've always had a very good experience with the fabrics from Woodin, Uniwax from Cote d'Ivoire, and then from GTP in Ghana. I used to buy from Cameroon, was it Citex or Cimex or something? I don't know, because it also changes and I might be out of date. So I think you have to look at your own market, and if you know that this manufacturer is reliable, you buy from them. If they're not reliable, you don't. You'll have to go market by market.
Thank you. There's a question from Selma. When using recycling and upcycling, the shapes might not be the same, but overall pattern is consistent. Would this be acceptable to pass the high quality test?
Yeah, I think upcycling is a whole different discussion. So it's a question of the quality of how you upcycle. And the sizing may change according to what garment you find and how you upcycle it. But now you sell it based on the differences, on the individuality. It's about the marketing, and yeah, each piece is going to be unique. So you'll be calling it limited edition and you'll market it differently.
Okay, Aisha has a question. Do you advise that tailors who work on custom orders to also work on ready-to-wear?
Interesting question. I got a very good tailor who'd only ever done custom made. And I must admit, he struggles a bit when I ask him to cut using a pattern. I can see he's still struggling a bit. He's not used to it. But I don't think it's something that can't be solved. Having said that, I have wondered if I should have him just on the tailoring garments, and I should almost start doing tailoring again and keep the others on the ready to wear. I think it will depend on the individual.
Okay, thanks. So there's a question from Farida. How do fashion designers tackle the problem of fast fashion?
Okay, that's a very big question, and there's lots of angles to look at. But can I say, I, as a designer, always recommend to the designers I mentor not to compare themselves with fast fashion. Use fast fashion, particularly if you can buy it secondhand, as a quality learning tool. Because a lot of fast fashion secondhand in our markets is very well constructed. It often has high quality fabric and good dyes. Now it's changing a bit because an example would be Shein. Shein is not high quality. It comes when it already has holes. But if you're getting secondhand some of these other brands, you can take them to pieces. You can check what the construction is like and learn from them. That's what I would say on that one. Now, in terms of competing, please don't. Please create different types of garments that are original to you and tell the story of limited edition. Limited edition means you don't do many of them and therefore they are more expensive. You cannot compete with fast fashion. Fast fashion, apart from the fabric, it's about the quantity. They negotiate very cheap rates of labor and of fabric based on the quantity they're making. And they're making tens of thousands. It's impossible for you to make at that price. If you do, you go out of business. And fast fashion still mark up more than most of you do. So the way they keep the prices down is based on volume. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay, there's another question. Let us just take this one and you can continue with your session. The question is, some or most local textile wholesalers don't know the fabric names and thereby its fiber name. How can one know what fiber is contained when buying in such circumstances?
I mean, I've answered that already. The real way to know is to burn it. So even just buy the smallest piece available. If you can get 2 yards, great, and then burn it and see. Because certainly even now with Ankara, you find some polycotton as opposed to cotton. So I don't know of another way of doing it, and I know that the wholesalers don't know. It is a problem. Yeah. And just one last question I'll answer. Is it possible to line a stretchy elastic material with a non-stretchy material? The answer is no. Because the fabric you use on the outside and the fabric you use on the inside need to have similar properties. So if you're doing something stretchy, you want the lining to stretch also. Now, the woven, just in general, lining is usually cut to be bigger, slightly bigger, like by very little, slightly bigger than the outer one. But in the case of stretch, when it's clinging to the body, that's not the case, but it has to be equally stretchy. Right, so I'm not going to discuss more on fast fashion, just to say fast fashion means what it is, fast. So the manufacturers make the garments very fast, but then also the consumption, and it's usually about how fast the consumer wears the things. Now, in my experience in Africa, we don't really have a consumption problem in the sense that most people buy what they need and then they give to someone else to wear. But in developed markets where people have, I don't know, lots of cash to do whatever they feel like, maybe, I don't know. And they maybe buy lots of different things. So they buy today, then they give it away or throw it away or something, and they buy the next thing, and then the next, and then the next. So it's the opposite of sustainability, and it's creating a lot of problems all over the world, but I'll talk about them another time. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm just going to drink a little bit of water. I hope all of you have come with your water as well. So I guess mine will be more important. Here we go. Garment construction. Now, we may not have time to go through absolutely everything, and that's fine because some of this you're going to read afterwards, but let's give it a go. So fusing. Fusing is the stiff thing that you add on a collar or on a cuff or on a facing to make something a little bit stiffer to give it a nicer finish. Try and match it, make it a similar weight to the outside garment. The fusing you use for a jacket in a heavy fabric is different from the one you use for a lightweight blouse. So try and match it and then cut the fusing a little bit smaller than the actual piece. So if you have a collar pattern, remove a little bit of the edge for the fusing so that you don't have the extra fabric in the seam. It makes it too bulky. Overlocking, this thing that we do on the edge of the fabric to keep it neat. Hands up if you have used a thread color, which is not the same as the actual fabric color. Be honest, I want some reactions. Yes. Okay, you've all made a problem because it makes it look very amateur. Now, some of you will be using an overlocker in a market. You'll take it to someone else and they'll say, oh no, we're only doing white overlocking today. And your garment is brown. And you'll just say, okay. No, it is a big no-no. The overlock thread color must match the fabric color. So go with your threads and take the time. I know it's more expensive, but the quality perception of your garment is much higher when the two match. I'm not going to read the rest of that. So the number one mistake I want to spend time on is tension. How many of you have seen a seam that is maybe flat on one side? The fabric is flat on one side and the other side is bumpy, bumpy, bumpy. Any reactions? Anybody seen that? Flat on one side and then bumpy on the other. And then the tailor gets to the bottom of the fabric and he finds one side is longer than the other. So he takes a pair of scissors and he just chops it off. True? Disaster. It's a disaster. So all the tailors tell you you can remove it by ironing. That is not true. It is not true. What you have to do, you see here, adjust the tension dial slowly. There's a little dial on the machine and you have to just literally go little bit at the time as you test the machine. I'm going to try to find you a YouTube video to post in the group so you can see what I'm talking about, or I'll do a video of me adjusting it. There is no shortcut. It is doesn't take a long time, but before the tailor changes fabric, give him a little piece of scrap fabric, let him now adjust it, and then he tests, and then he adjusts and he tests and he adjusts. And when he's finished, it should be smooth on both sides. That is how you get correct tension. I see it all the time. If you are using a fabric that's for a jacket for winter, and then you're using something that's chiffon, a lightweight blouse, definitely the dial must be adjusted. Excuse me saying he, I realize I'm saying he when I'm referring to tailors. Where we are, most of the tailors are he, but not all of them. So I apologize for saying that. Now, other things that can affect the tension, the condition of your sewing machine. Some people are sewing on old machines that are in bad condition. An old machine in a good condition is gold, but some of them are not. And so when your tailors are consistently complaining, check the condition of the machine, get someone to come and have a look. Check the quality of the thread. The bobbin is the bit that goes underneath with the thread. Check that, maybe it's too tight, maybe there's something that needs adjusted. And maybe you've threaded the sewing machine incorrectly, so the thread is not flowing, it's getting stuck. Sometimes it can be the stitching size, though not usually, but it can happen. My thing was, just like I said, take the time to get the pattern right, take the time to get the tension right. Clipping. Some people don't clip. By clipping, I mean cutting lines or V's. V's remove extra fabric, lines allow things to open. The inside of the garment, if I see something bumping on the outside of the garment, the first place I look is here. I open the seam, I turn the facing like I did before, and I check, particularly if it's on a corner, like a round curve, I check if it's been clipped. Also going into a collar that stands up. The neck edge of the garment is smaller than the collar. So you have to cut all the way around for it to be able to stand straight. If you don't do that, it's going to be bumping. Then hand stitching. Hands up if you've asked your tailors to stitch something by hand and they look at you like you've come from the moon. They are not interested. I don't know if you have to give them prizes every time you see them with a needle in their hand, but a lot of them don't like doing that. Sometimes it's a must. Often when putting in a zip, often when stitching a difficult area on an elaborate garment in a delicate fabric, you have to do things by hand. If you don't, and you do it in my machine and you make a mistake and you pull the thread out, you can see the marks. Really just keep trying. If you're in streetwear, then you don't use hand stitching often. But if you're in particularly women's wear or men's suit jackets, you just have to stitch. You have to use the hand. You'll sometimes see a sleeve, which is baggy at the back on one side, baggy at the front on the other side. Why? Because they've used no pins, no hand stitching. They've sewn in one direction one way, one direction the other way, and the result is things look different. Correcting it is a waste of time and money. Time is money, it's a waste. Just get on their case that they have to pick a needle and thread sometimes. So hemming, blind hemming, if you look at the screen, the one on the far left, that is what it looks like on the inside. It's a specific machine. And then on the outside, you can't really see it. You can also achieve that by hand, but it takes time. So I would use it with a luxury fabric that you're going to charge a lot of money to the consumer. I would take my uniform bottoms. If I have a blind hemmer, but if you don't have one, find out who does. Maybe one of you has, and you can also charge a small fee to other designers to do the blind hemming with you. It adds value to the bottom of a dress, to the bottom of a trouser. It makes it look good. Ones where you can see the stitching, like say in this line in the middle, those ones you would use for streetwear, you wouldn't use them, or maybe some casual wear, you wouldn't use them for a suit. And also remember, if your skirt is flared and you want to use the blind hemmer, you need to press it with an iron so it's even before you use the machine. The threads on the inside of a garment, you cannot shake them off. I see people shaking, shaking, shaking. The thread is going to get stuck on the fabric. You take them off by cutting them and removing them, or you get a sticky tape or a sticky roller and you roll them off, but you're not going to do it by shaking. So please try and convince your team or yourself. And then ironing. First of all, get a scrap of fabric and test the fabric with the iron. If you can smell it, it's too hot. If it's shiny, it's too hot. And once you've damaged the fiber of the textile, you cannot change it. So take the time with a new fabric. When you get it, you test it for water, you test it for dry clean fluid, and you test it with the iron. And you make sure that your people know that. Either they do the testing or you do, but they have to know, because it's damaged for life. Silk that's been used, like real silk with too hot an iron, damaged for life. Linen can have very hot. There's another thing you'll notice. Sometimes people iron over a seam on the outside with the iron too hot, and you can see the mark of the seam. The iron was too hot. You can also use steam, and you steam above the garment and then you pat it. Do that with delicate fabric. For the proper finishing of your garment, iron all of the seams open, even if you're going to iron them to one side afterwards for a top stitch. Iron them open first, it gives a very neat finish. And make sure that when you're stitching something, that if necessary, the tailors are ironing in the process of stitching. So before they put a sleeve in, they've ironed open the shoulder and the underarm. And then when you need to iron or press the garments at the end, start with the smallest parts first. Start with ironing the collar, the waistband, the cuffs, and the arms, which are smaller. And then you do the big parts last. Because when you do the big part, you want to be able to just remove it from the ironing board and hang. And if you can leave it to cool before you fold it, the better. You can use a steamer, great. But if you don't have one, this is what to do. And that's it. The end is the beginning. So now I want you to go back, look at the products you're making, and see exactly how you can improve. And I will be taking questions in the WhatsApp group. I'll answer them tomorrow. Don't crowd your WhatsApp group with the same questions. If you notice someone's already asked the question, leave it. We can see it once and answer for everyone. I don't know, Omombaki, have we got any emergency?
Thank you very much, and Margaret. It was such an amazing session, and I'm very sure that everybody in the class learned one or two things in the course of the session. And of course, I can assure you that it was something that was very educative. I can see comments in the chat box, everybody saying the session was educative and they learned something today. So please note that Margaret is going to be added to the WhatsApp group, and she's going to be open to answer all your questions. The WhatsApp group will be opened up after the session to accommodate your questions, and we'll shut it down afterwards. Please ensure, just like she has said, any question that has been asked before, ensure that you do not repeat such questions. If you have not been registered on the Moodle platform, please kindly send an email to Fashionomics Helpdesk at cchubnigeria.com and we'll respond to you as soon as we can. The recorded version of this session is going to be uploaded on Moodle, and that's why it's very important that you are part of the session. Like I said earlier, if you have any questions, please send them to the WhatsApp group after this call, because we'll be opening up the WhatsApp group. And you can also send it via email. I'll be more than happy to respond to you. Thank you very much for attending today's session. And we look forward to having another session on Thursday, which is going to be very, very enlightening and educative. Do have an amazing day and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very, very much.
I'm just going to add one more thing, because I saw a few comments in the chat box. A lot of this is about HR management, human resource management. How do you manage people? Because at the end of the day, you've got people selling to you. You want them to be honest to you. You have people that you have employed who you want to bring out the best. So try and see what can you do with regular training, regular conversations. When things go wrong, try not to get furious, very angry. Try to be calm and use it as a teaching session. But also make sure you have a contract with your staff, whether they're casual or whether they're full-time. Have some kind of commitment to quality that they are willing to listen, learn, and improve. And then just try to make it fun. Okay, good luck, and looking forward to hearing your questions. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, and do have an amazing time. We'll catch up on the WhatsApp group for questions, inquiries, and engagement and networking. Do have an amazing day. Thank you very much.